DW Africa Link.
It should have been a safe place to sleep. Instead, for 16 girls, the dormitory became a death trap. And now Kenya is asking the same painful question it asks after every school fire. How does a boarding school meant to protect children become the very place that kills them? And how can such incidents be prevented? That's what's coming up. I am Eddy Micah Jr, and you are welcome to Africa Link, the podcast connecting you to the stories that matter.
Africa Link, every weekday here on DW.
On May 28th, a fire ripped through a dormitory at Utumishi Girls Academy in Kenya, killing 16 girls and injuring 79 others. The tragedy has taken a dramatic turn, with police holding 9 students as they investigate claims the fire may have been deliberately set. But beyond who started the blaze, why were so many students trapped? Investigators say an emergency exit was never opened, forcing hundreds of girls to scramble through a single doorway as panic spread. So could more lives have been saved? To help us understand the developing story and its implications, let's get more from Brenda Nyawara, Vice President of the Architectural Association of Kenya, AAK, and DW's Lucy Riley. Lucy, investigations are ongoing, but what do we know so far about the tragedy?
Thank you very much, Eddy. So what we know is that fire broke out on May the 27th in the wee hours of the morning at 1 a.m. at the Utumishi Girls Academy Senior School. That's in Gilgil, which is about 120 kilometers northwest of the capital in Nairobi. And we also know that despite the report of the fire brigade arrived more than 2 hours later. Now, 16 students have died and 79 others were injured, and some are still in hospital receiving treatment for smoke inhalation, minor burns, and fractures, and many have been discharged. We know that 9 students have been arrested and are spending 21 days at a children's remand home to allow police to conclude investigations. The matter will be mentioned on the 24th of this month of June. And what's interesting is that the prosecution told the court that police are investigating a case of murder and arson, among other cases. Now, from the investigations that have been conducted so far, we know that the dormitory in question was housing approximately 200 students. And one of the 4 students who was hospitalized after the fire broke out has spoken to media and has revealed that the suspects had an ongoing dispute with teachers and wanted to avoid disciplinary action. So the student who actually suffered the fractures on both legs is now at home and she cannot walk. But now we know that the students who lit the fire or allegedly lit the fire wanted to avoid a disciplinary session scheduled with the principal the following day. So it's a very tragic incident that occurred. And these are the facts that we have at the moment.
Thank you very much, Lucy. That really gets us up to speed with the matter. Again, not the first time such a tragedy is happening in Kenya. I'm wondering what the mood in the country is like.
Eddy, there's been condolences messages that have been pouring into the parents who lost their children in the tragic incident. And honestly, there's been a wave of collective grief expressed through raw pain, sorrow, empathy, and just a sense of communal solidarity. Now, since the incident occurred, some sources say that at least 40 schools across the country have already been closed indefinitely following more fires, threats, and even student unrests. So multiple institutions have been shutting down and sending their learners home because of what occurred at Utumishi Girls Secondary School. And people really have been expressing mixed reactions. There are some who've been questioning why the suspects might have started the fire to begin with. Many are angry and disappointed over the authorities and the school in question. and it has certainly reignited this conversation about boarding school safety. I know that the Education Principal Secretary, the government, has proposed, suspending exams because this is a period of exams that most schools in Kenya are going into. But school heads are also pushing back, and they are arguing that assessments are central to learning, and also removing them would lead to, these students being idle, and that's even more disruptive. But also it's important to note that there are other schools that have just remained open and they are continuing with their academic calendar, Eddie.
There's been previous fire incidents in Kenya. Is this one of the most gruesome ones, considering how many people died?
Eddie, unfortunately, it's a pattern that's just dominated the country's education system for more than 30 years. Allow me to take you back a bit, back to 2001, when there were 67 students who died in a dormitory in a fire in one of the counties. That's Machakos County, not far from Nairobi. And since then, there have been several arson attacks and several deaths of students. The one that we remember more recently is in 2024, where 21 students burned to death at Endarasha Hillside. And, many fires reported in boarding schools have, been the result of arson, with just disgruntled pupils, angry about the discipline and sometimes living conditions and peer pressure. And there are several causes that can be argued. But also, there are some people who suggest that, this is more or less becoming a matter of indiscipline, maybe even caused by poor parenting. Others recommend that caning should be reintroduced because in Kenya, interestingly, Kenya banned corporal punishment in 2001. And so you find the disciplinary system is one to question. But then also there are some who also say that many of the fires are started by students who are protesting harsh conditions, things like food, poor relations, drug abuse even, inadequate counseling services. So indeed, Eddie, while this is a very, very tragic incident that claimed the lives of the 16, unfortunately, it is becoming a pattern in the country, Eddie.
Right. The question, though, Brenda, could many lives have been saved? We're talking about 16 children dead, 79 or more injured. I do understand that some part of the investigation suggests that the school matron failed to open the emergency door, for example, which forced students to scramble through a single doorway. What went wrong, do you think, Brenda, with the setup of the dorm and the school as a whole?
Eddie, I think that's a question we're all asking ourselves, because if you put the cause aside, the response times aside, we also have to blame the building itself. A building is supposed to be a safe space for its occupants to a given extent. And when it becomes unsafe, it's supposed to allow the occupants to be able to exit, to leave, to escape from whatever danger that is inside the building. However, if you really look at it, now we unearth the gaps that we can now see in our boarding schools, especially the dormitories. You'd ask yourself, if a building is designed for fire safety, how come it takes that long that people can't, the occupants can't leave and they are suffocated inside it? And why can't the building be accessed easily by someone from the outside if the occupants can't leave? And then you'll ask yourself, were there inspections done to make sure that, there's a fire escape that's functional, that the materials of the building have a high fire rating, meaning they can allow, they can withstand the heat for maybe 2-3 hours to allow evacuation. You'd ask yourself, were the occupants aware that here, if a fire starts, we have this direction to follow, or there's this, collapsible window, for example, or are there grills all over to try and keep children safe, but at the same time, this becomes the cage that keeps them in the danger. I mean, we're asking so many questions that now have sparked a discussion for how safe are buildings designed and even maintained throughout its lifestyle to protect the people who are living and occupying the spaces inside. I still believe the answers to these questions are being, deliberated upon, but in the deliberation is where we get the full answers as to why the fires can actually cause actual deaths of occupants in buildings.
So if we look at the building itself, I'm sure you've had the chance, you know the school that this tragedy happened. You've had a chance to look at it. Is there something you sense is needed or should have been in place that could have prevented so many people from dying?
Yes, there's so many things that we're now seeing should have been in place, but were a bit overlooked. Just from the look of the buildings that are used as dormitories for our public schools, especially, it's a sad state to even say that some of those designs were not really for spaces to be occupied by children. Some may not have received approvals from county governments or even from regulatory bodies that are supposed to make sure these spaces are going to host 200, 300, 500 people at a go. If you're looking at exit and escape routes, some are actually locked. Some have grills on the doors and windows that nothing can go in, nothing can go out unless one person who has the key is able to open them. If you look at the building materials, yes, we are very happy to use masonry and concrete, but how high is their fire rating when it comes to trying to protect 200 people trying to escape from a building? And even the ceiling finishes that we use in our spaces, the gypsum or chipboard, they are very highly inflammable. And then considering these dormitories have quite a high percentage of fabric and materials, if it's timber, the furnishing itself contributes to the fire. So if you're looking at a high-risk fire, high-risk building, the dormitories are very much up there. And so you ask yourself, what kind of precautions were taken to protect these occupants? Because clearly the building itself is already a high risk by its use. And then of course in Kenya, I would ask, was there any consideration for fire detection or alarm systems for that building, and not just on site, but an alarm system that goes off and alerts authorities and first responders to come to site immediately it goes off? And you'd also ask yourself, when it comes to electrical safety, because that's what contributes or adds to a fire. A fire can be started by fuel or something, but then the electrical wiring of the building is what can go so wrong and even spark more and add to the fires in the building. You ask, how often are these inspected? How often are the fire drills done for the students to be aware? How often do authorities even check to see that the buildings have certification? Because by the time you're giving a business permits to a business operating, they come and inspect for fire safety. But the buildings, once they're done for schools, it's a one-off. And so such things, you ask yourself, is the building itself safe in this day and age compared to when it was constructed?
I think that's a very good point you're raising, because I couldn't help but think the same, because I'm just thinking such a building that is housing people, shouldn't some checks have been made to ensure that they meet the safety requirements? But then what you're saying is that even if they did, there's the continuation part of it. Like, is it still solid enough? Is it still working?
Yes, I don't think it has been the case. It hasn't been the case, because if you ask for records or reports of such inspections happening, I'm quite sure that hasn't happened. And if you look at the occupancy limits that we have right now compared to what's actually on the ground, that clearly is not being followed. And you'd ask yourself also, how often do they check for the fire drills, if they're done, or even fire safety? Because those records are not public and not published, it means they're probably non-existent, which means there was no consideration for such, continuous consideration for such.
Right. Thank you very much, Brenda. I have learned a lot from what you've said. And I have to be honest, this really, it annoys me a bit more, right? Because it's this sort of nonchalant behavior, isn't it? Where, it's all about, okay, discipline, in boarding schools. But safety is at the latter. It's really at the bottom. And this is exactly why it seems Kenya has been going through a lot of these tragedies. Lucy, how much blame from all that you've been hearing so far is being placed on the school's emergency systems and supervision?
Indeed, a lot of blame is being placed on the school's supervision and systems, and there's been intense scrutiny which has fallen on this institution's emergency systems, the supervision protocols, and even the board management, which was subsequently dissolved following preliminary findings over overcrowding and safety violations. Now, despite, we know that there was CCTV cameras that were in the dormitory. Investigations actually revealed that there were concerns regarding just police guards being on the premise and just doing something about it, right? And so the parents are disgruntled and very unhappy about how the whole matter was actually taken into account. And you find that we've it's important to mention that Amnesty International actually reacted to what's been happening earlier this week. And Amnesty says that, according to that report, the school in question, Utumishi Girls, had 715 students who are admitted this year in 2026, but the capacity of the school is at 650. So already that is a clear indication of overcrowding. And there are other issues that have also been raised by parents and by the public. For instance, the installation of the CCTV cameras where minors sleep and also change. There are questions about it possibly being a violation to their right to privacy. And, the footage itself that we've all seen on social media appears to show the beds placed in the corridors, but also in the very same corridors, there are beds there, and which is where the students were sleeping, which is another indication of overcrowding. And this has really raised serious concerns, Eddy.
Totally. I mean, you mentioned a lot of interesting facts out there that you've gathered that I wish we had time to dig into all of it. I mean, why is there a CCTV camera inside the dormitory where girls change? I will digress if I want to go deeper into that. But again, I guess this is what the investigations are ongoing for. And it's good that all of these things are highlighted. And if even there was that CCTV camera, why couldn't people see the fire soon enough to go and save the girls? I have so many questions, Lucy, and I know you don't have all the answers. And so we'll obviously keep tab on this and see how the investigations go. But in terms of the conversation in the country, considering again that this is not new and this happens quite often, unfortunately, in Kenya, what's the national conversation like about boarding school safety? Is there a sense that this time around it's being taken seriously, Lucy?
Indeed, Eddy, that's a very important question, because one of the things I was having a discussion with some people, and one of the things is whether or not, the suspects would be held to account. This has happened before, like I earlier mentioned, and one of the things is whether or not there's been any action that has been taken before, or whether or not there will be any action that will be taken against the suspects. And when you look back in time a little bit, we have one incident, for instance, where in 2021, for example, there were several incidents that occurred and the Ministry of Education actually issued a response to a parliamentary committee which had requested information about school arson crisis in the country. And around 41 students appeared in court. We don't know how many of those were found guilty, because the situation in Kenya is that the Kenyan courts restrict reporting on crimes involving children. It's quite limited. But one of the few convictions that we're aware of, which took place in 2022, an 18-year-old was found guilty of manslaughter for starting a fire that resulted in the death of 10 students at Moi Girls High School, which was back in 2017 when she was 14. So really the conversation has been around, what happens next, who is going to be held to the account. And I'll tell you this, Eddy, one parent who lost his child said, the only form of justice would be to bring back his daughter. and that was very daunting to know that it's a very difficult position for these parents. Grieving parents and some of the survivors' relatives have heavily questioned school administration failures, pointing to those accounts of the survivors. And we've been seeing a display of community support. Some parents whose daughters has survived the inferno have come together and decided to visit and to walk and to support the parents who lost their children. And I remember watching another video online which circulated of a parent whose daughter is among those, for instance, who is in custody, and she was strongly denying that her child could do such a thing, wanting her to be released. And some of the comments paint a picture that suggests that many parents may not really know how their children behave at boarding schools. And so this is definitely a conversation that the public discourse has been going on where is the problem and who is going to be held to account, and what would accountability really look like, Eddy?
Right. I mean, that's the billion-dollar question. What will accountability look like, and what will be the role of the government in really trying to once and for all find a solution to this? Let's wrap up with more of the solutions, because I want us to really learn a lot from this, Brenda. So quick fire questions for you to answer, 30 seconds each, right? How often should fire drills and safety inspections be carried out in boarding schools?
Usually, any kind of, whenever there's a new user for a space, there has to be a safety drill taken, at least for them to be aware of their space and their surroundings. And I think for children, let's have it done every term. Every time they come back to school, that means 3 times a year. Let them be aware. The same way they come back to school, they're reminded of school rules and school regulations. Let that be part of it.
Right. Second question. What are the most important design features that make a boarding school dormitory safe, especially from such fire outbreaks?
All right, fire exits, open doors, ability to access whatever kind of escape way is needed, wide circulation for huge populations, at least consideration for materials and furnishings within the dormitory to have fabric that is less inflammable, ceilings that are that have a higher fire rating, smoke detectors, emergency lighting, fire extinguishers, and the ability to know how to use them or ability to use them, high supervision at least, and I would say at the very least have windows that can be used as escape. I think the rest can also just be about design. It's not a bad thing to have high occupancy, but the design really has to reflect how comfortable and how safe are the people who are occupying the space. Right.
I've really learned a lot from the both of you with the stories that you've shared, with all that you've shared with us. I have learned a lot. Brenda Nyawara, Vice President of the Architectural Association of Kenya, AAK, and DW's Lucy Riley. Thanks to both of you for sharing your insights and knowledge with us.
Thank you very much, Eddy. Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Eddy and Lucy.
If boarding schools are to remain trusted places for children, safety has to come first. Building on the lessons from this recent tragedy, let's hear from some Kenyans on what needs to change to better protect students.
I feel like when it comes to boarding school, the biggest and the best approach is dealing with these kids, nurturing them mentally and emotionally. Because as much as you have seen, as much as we put external safety measures, it is never 100%.
As much as we might be blaming the children, we need to know what exactly made them do it, or what makes them do it, because it's something that has been repeating itself. Parents and teachers should always be in the forefront to know what these kids are facing in life. Sometimes I feel like these measures are not in place as the way it should be. I think now the school authorities, they should always act according to the regularities provided by the Ministry of Education.
If we can have people have like mental health talks or something, wanting to know what these students are going through, so that they can know the cause of these incidents.
We're not doing much when it comes to security, because even there are some cases, even you find the security guards, some of them are asleep, some of them are sleeping, some of them that they're not even in their posts. Security also comes in terms of maybe the dorms. You should have wide windows, you should have wide doors, places of emergencies, fire assembly points. Like, we just have to make sure that everything is okay when it comes to the personnel in charge of security, the cameras we are situating them, the fences, the doors, the windows, everything must be perfect for the security to be perfect.
Now, in the past, deadly school fires have prompted investigations, recommendations, and promises of change. However, as we've just heard, many schools still face overcrowding, aging facilities, and weak enforcement of safety standards. This shows that the challenge today isn't a lack of rules, it's making sure those rules are enforced before another tragedy strikes. What do you think? Share your thoughts on Facebook at DW Africa. Listen to us on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts, and subscribe to our DW Africa YouTube channel so you never miss an episode. This show was co-produced and edited by Isaac Mugabe, and I am Eddy Micah Jr. Thanks for listening.
DW, made for minds.